Next up, it's Movie Spotlight, our Friday feature where we look at the latest releases at the Korean box office and online. And we do that with our film critics who will give their reviews of those films. And today they are joining us via video call. First, we have joining us via video call Jason Bechervaise. Jason, hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, it's good to see you. And we have also Darcy Paquet with us as well. Darcy, hello to you too.
Hi, great to be here.
Yes, it's great to see you both via the screen today. Okay, so we've got a couple of blockbusters to review because it is a blockbuster season at the Korean box office at the moment. And this week we have two big budget local releases for our critics to discuss. First up, it is The Moon. It has the same name in Korean as well. It's a special effects heavy story set in the near future about an ill-fated expedition to the moon by Korea's space agency. So, Darcy, can you start us off for us? Can you tell us what it's about?
Sure. So it's set in the year 2029, and the backdrop to the story is that Korea had a previous planned expedition to the moon 5 years earlier, but it ended in this tragic fiery explosion. So the stakes are even higher as they plan for a second expedition, and it launches into space with 3 astronauts on board. Unfortunately, the first of what will prove to be several spectacularly unfortunate coincidences hits the expedition. There's a solar wind from a sunspot explosion that leads to tragedy. And so, with disaster imminent, the disgraced former leader of the previous expedition is brought back from his kind of self-imposed exile to rescue the mission. So the film stars singer-actor Do Kyung-soo, former member of the group EXO, as well as veteran Seo-joon and Kim Hee-ae.
Right, so it's essentially a sort of disaster film, but set in space, a bit like Gravity, right? So Jason, the director of this film, Kim Yong-hwa, he's had his share of hits and misses so far during the course of his career, right?
Yeah, very much so. So, along with The Gods, these were 2 films, part 1 and part 2, big gamble for the studio and for the director. And the company that he founded as well, Dexter Studios. So they both sold over 10 million tickets, and he's made films such as Take Off, and also, which was actually very successful. But he has had some kind of box office disasters along the way, including Mr. Go, about a gorilla playing baseball, which was a spectacular flop. Actually, I kind of like the film.
So let's say like a gorilla playing baseball.
Yes. Well, there's an interesting story there. It actually led to the company, the visual effects studio, Dexter Studios, being created, which then kind of put together, rendered these special effects for various other Korean films, including Along with the Gods. So
right.
That was something that came out of that box office disaster. But I have to be quite honest with The Moon. I think this is destined for complete and utter failure. It already is failing spectacularly here in Korea, and I just don't see it going anywhere overseas, really, at least making a mark. It's atrocious.
Well, it is crashing at the box office. Darcy, what's your take on the film?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know where to start exactly, but it feels in some ways very familiar. Like, it doesn't bring very much new to the blockbuster formula in Korea. It's very much kind of a tell, don't show type of approach to storytelling too. There's a lot of exposition, a lot of scenes where you have, many people in a room kind of shouting out exposition to each other and explaining things for the audience. And of course, we do get these visual effects, but I don't know. I mean, watching the film, it made me think that to a certain extent, some of these Korean studios have kind of gotten a little bit out of touch with what audiences actually want. Like there was a time when, you could say, well, it used to be only Hollywood that makes these kind of films, and now Korea can make this kind of film. So the audience will get really excited and they'll come to the theater. And I mean, this film is obviously built off films like Apollo 13 and Gravity, but the storytelling is so far below those films that audiences are rejecting it with quite some force. So I don't know. It's the kind of film that makes you a little bit pessimistic about the current state of Korean cinema.
Wow, that's very damning. So it seems like the studios are perhaps focusing on quantity or scale of the films rather than quality. Jason, what about you? What did you make of it?
Well, it's a complete train wreck of a film. It feels incredibly forced. The thing that works so well for films like Gravity and The Martian as well, which performed very well in Korea, is that they have a logical, chain of events, sequence of events, which are very effective. They pull the audience in. They're very engaging. You have likable characters. But this movie, the sequence of events is so illogical, it's ridiculous. And the thing is, you can have a dumb film but make it fun. Armageddon is a great example of that. It's complete, it's nonsense, but it's a great popcorn film. But this film, on the other hand, it's never fun. It's never entertaining. And it's like this emotional roller coaster. 1 minute is depressing and somber and, they're dealing with grief and all the rest of it. And then 1 minute they're jubilant. And then something happens, there's a meteor shower or something like that. And it's destruction again. And it just feels so forced. And it's so dependent on melodrama.
Right.
It's from the very beginning of the film right to the very conclusion. And if you read reviews in Korea, they'll talk quite a bit about Shimpa, which is it refers to kind of very kind of dramatic emotional force in the film, and that's very much true here. And I'm not surprised to see audiences reject the film. And I think, yes, this film I stress, may have worked a few years ago. Hyundai, it reminded me of Hyundai in a sense that was,
Right.
again, a very forced film. And actually worked really well, I think in 2010, the late 2000s when it was released. But we're now in a very different time. We're going to talk about Concrete Utopia in a second. And the films that are working at the box office right now are films that I think are different. And we saw that with Smugglers or Milsu, which is a female-led film, and the imagery there is striking. And certainly Concrete Utopia is a very, very different film as well. So I think these films that were kind of greenlit a few years ago, thinking the audiences will really go for this, I think they proved very, very wrong.
Right, so it's becoming a bit of a bomb, bit of a turkey. Darcy, very briefly, how big of a disaster is the moon for its investors at the moment?
Well, the officially announced budget is 28 billion won, and so it needs to sell about 6 million tickets just to break even. And right now it's looking like it may not even reach 500,000 tickets. So,
wow.
Given how hard the industry was hit by the pandemic, I think absorbing those losses is going to be a real challenge.
That is a huge loss. Okay, so that is a bit of a disaster, unfortunately. That was The Moon. Let's turn to our second film. Hopefully, this is a bit better. The second film this week is another special effects heavy production, which cost more than 20 billion won to make as well. It's based on a webtoon called Pleasant Bullying. And the title of the film is called Concrete Utopia. It imagines life in Seoul after an earthquake of unprecedented proportions. So, Jason, can you set up for us?
Yeah, so this, I might add, very early on, is a much better film. I love this film. At the beginning, there's this catastrophic earthquake that pretty much destroys everything. It's never really explained what really happened or what caused the earthquake. But at the center of this film is this apartment, the only single apartment building left. I mean, at the beginning, there's this kind of archive footage that looks at kind of the history of apartments in Korea, and so it centers on this apartment and its residents, and essentially trying to survive. And it begins where you've got survivors from outside the apartment block. They kind of come in and they're kind of living together and helping each other out. But then conflicts begin to arise. They start kind of voting and whether to keep them or reject them, and they're unceremoniously pushed out of the complex.
Right.
And you have this man played by Lee Byung-hun. He's a little bit mysterious. He kind of appears not right at the beginning, after a few minutes into the film. And he kind of leads. He's kind of the representative of this particular block. And there's a backstory to him, which is quite disturbing. But yeah, ultimately you've got all these different residents. You've got a couple as well, played by Seo-joon and Park Bo-young. They're ultimately, it's completely lawless and very dystopian, and they're left to fend for themselves. So it's a tale of survival.
Right. Okay. Darcy, it doesn't sound like your typical summer blockbuster. It sounds, as Jason said, quite dystopian and a sort of end-of-world apocalypse film, right?
Very much so. I mean, it's really dark. There's, a bit of a Lord of the Flies vibe in the sense that, this struggle to survive and the fact that everything has been destroyed and kind of upended means that, the old established norms of society, including just the basic moral norms of what you should and shouldn't do, all start to come apart. And so there's that aspect of it, kind of like the, human nature when pushed to the extremes and how people respond to that. At the same time, having an apartment complex at the center, I think the film is deliberately kind of evoking all these different issues within contemporary Korean society. So like class divisions and, this really cutthroat nature of Korean society. So the film has a lot to say. There's a lot of kind of symbolism worked into the setup of this film. But it's not afraid to drag its audience into some pretty dark places in order to make its point. So yeah, it's surprising to see it in the summer. But I think that the fact that the budget is so high meant that they needed to release it during this peak summer season.
Right. And Jason, you said it's a much better film than The Moon then?
Oh, yeah. I came out of The Moon just wanting to bang my head against the wall. And I came out of this film this morning. I went to see it at 8 o'clock this morning, and I was like really excited because I actually taught a class on dystopian Korean content, and I think this film reflects wider changes in the industry because Netflix have financed a lot of this very dark content. You just look at things like Squid Game, for example.
Sure.
And I think, comparing it to The Moon, which feels like a film that was, might have worked a few years ago, but no longer. Whereas this film feels like, well, because this kind of content is working quite well on streaming platforms, they're kind of thinking ahead. And actually, this film, there's a sequel's already been made, starring Ma Dong-seok. There's also a series. So I think this film is reflective of wider changes of the industry. I think Lee Byung-hun at the center of this film is really smart. He is absolutely fantastic. His character he's difficult to read initially. He comes across as somewhat kind of clumsy and
Right.
absent-minded. But actually, is that really who he is? And Park Bo-young, I've long admired her, but she's just terrific here, and is really well cast. Lee Byung-hun is very smart in the projects he chooses, and this is no exception.
Right.
I love the way it's shot, some really interesting imagery. Apartments are ubiquitous in Korea, and so it's really clever to have this at the center of the story. And as Darcy said, there's a lot of kind of social issues that it kind of relates to that I think audiences can certainly connect with.
Sure.
And it does take audiences in really quite bleak and dark places, but I think it asks these questions that I think that are raised on a day-to-day basis, and we can relate to that. And that Netflix, like I said, is it's certainly
Sure.
benefited out of this content, and I think this film is kind of following suit.
And Darcy, did you enjoy it as well?
Yeah, I'm not sure if enjoy is necessarily the right word because, I think, I mean, first you just sort of have to get it out of your head that it's not a popcorn movie. It's not a summer blockbuster, even
Interesting.
though it's being released as such. And, it's been really interesting to see kind of the audience reaction. It's only been in theaters for a couple of days now, but it does seem to be provoking really wild extremes in terms of how people respond to it. I think if you go in kind of expecting the right thing, then, it's certainly really unique among the films that have been released this year. It's certainly really well made, well acted. And yeah, I mean, I'm pulling for the film. I hope that it does well. Because certainly, I mean, this is kind of a risk-taking,
Sure.
type of film that the industry needs. And
Absolutely.
yeah. So yeah, I do recommend that people check it out. I mean, brace
Right.
yourselves, because it is a little bit
Yeah.
dark, but it's very well made.
And the industry does need more hits at the moment, more local hits especially. Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. We've been speaking to Jason Bechervaise and Darcy Paquet. Gentlemen, thank you as always for your reviews, and we'll see you next time.
Yep.
See you in the studio.